I'm going to need to stand there. Okay. What is you need to focus? Is that
Just to see if you
okay?
Então, sem mais demoras, já fizemos aqui um compasso de espera importante, diria que podemos começar esta nossa apresentação, que é uma ocasião belíssima de escutar uma pessoa de valor do calibre do Dr. Isar. Não vou fazer nenhuma apresentação extensiva e mesmo o João, a quem vou pedir que depois possa dizer duas ou três indicações curriculares, a pedido do Dr. Raj, vai fazer uma muito breve contextualização. Estou a falar em português à vontade porque o Raj, não obstante a sua modéstia, percebe muito bem o português e fala com uma pronúncia muito bonita, mas vai fazer a conferência em inglês. Dizer só que é um enorme prazer que o Raj venha apresentar o que vem aqui hoje mostrar, e eu diria que o aspecto mais para mim estimulante e que desde sempre foi razão de um enorme apreço pelo Raj é a sua elegância. Elegância em todos os sentidos, pessoal, mas eu diria intelectual. E eu creio que é muito importante e muito interessante ver aqui uma pessoa que não é um arquiteto falar do valor enorme, como vamos ver e alguns conhecerão, do prémio HK, que é um prémio de uma relevância incrível, sobretudo pela maneira como está construído, vamos ver isso agora, e também não é um académico. E, ao mesmo tempo, não sendo um académico, conhece bem a academia e relaciona-se ao mais alto nível com a academia. Não sendo um arquiteto, conhece arquitetos e vai, espero eu, também mostrar-nos aqui maneiras importantes de olhar para a arquitetura a partir de fora. Obrigado, Raj. João, queria pedir que pudesse as suas palavras.
Então, boa tarde a todos. Obrigado, em primeiro lugar, pela presença do Sr. Reitor, do Departamento de Arquiteturas Familiares. Também obrigado ao Raj por se ter deslocado a Évora mais uma vez. É uma bonita coincidência termos o Dr. Raj connosco. Se lembrarmos que, penso que por volta de 2014, 2015, a Universidade de Évora atribuiu o doutoramento honoris causa à Sua Excelência o Príncipe HK. O Príncipe HK é realmente o expoente de uma grande comunidade ismaelita e tem, obviamente, o seu emanado com sede em Portugal, que também é um fator muito distintivo do nosso país e da nossa cultura receber a sede do emanado, neste caso Portugal em Lisboa, mas a Fundação HK tem uma network de trustees específicos para a divulgação da cultura, o estudo e a pesquisa. O Dr. Isar é o Deputy Director do HK Trust for Culture. Eu convido os alunos, obviamente, a verem o website que está muito bem estruturado com todas as iniciativas. E é um grande prazer para o Departamento de Arquitetura, para mim em particular, e penso para as escolas também, receber o Dr. Isar, que nós conhecemos já desde 2019, fizemos um protocolo com a HK Trust Fundação, já desenvolvemos um projeto em FES, que alguns alunos já beneficiaram, obviamente, dessa experiência que temos estado a trabalhar. O Dr. Raj tem uma formação multicultural que cross different disciplines, a economia, a antropologia, a sociologia, foi professor em Florença, foi professor em Paris, trabalhou largos anos na Unesco e, obviamente, abraça com todo o carinho e dedicação, com grande inteligência, a divulgação desta cultura dentro do espírito HK for Culture. E ele irá falar de vários anos de experiência que o prémio HK tem acumulado, que é um prémio que é atribuído de 3 em 3 anos, e precisamente tem várias hierarquias de juries, e é um prémio que evoca quer os clientes, quer as cidades, quer os arquitetos, toda a equipe. Portanto, sai um bocadinho fora deste caminho que nós estamos habituados, um bocadinho isomórfico, do prémio para o arquiteto. Este prémio é muito mais abrangente e, obviamente, foca na arquitetura construída no espaço muçulmano. Obrigado, Raj. Boa conferência.
muito obrigado, João e João. Muito boa tarde a todos. As was pointed out already, I can't do much more in Portuguese, I'm afraid. So I'm going to continue in English. I hope it will be clear. If I speak too fast, just raise your hand and let me know. One little correction for you, João. I'm not the deputy director of the trust. I was hired by the trust just about 5 years ago to set up an education program that would be a way of sharing the accumulated knowledge resources, the learnings from two of the trust's flagship programs with the world of academia and the world of schools. So I'm a kind of bridge builder person between the two, and I'm enjoying it immensely. Of course, I knew about the work of the trust, I knew about the work of the award before joining, but the following the actual evolution of the award, as I have now done for several years, is really an exciting experience. And I'm sure some of you know about the award already, and I hope that what I will share with you today will be more learning of a very useful type. And Madam Rector, I'm very honored by your presence. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all of you who are faculty and students. And I'm going to get going right away. Just to share with you the fact that the Aga Khan Development Network, which is a constellation of organizations and agencies put together over 60, 70 years now by the Aga Khan, is actually a huge organization with different agencies. And we, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, we are on the right there. We are the smallest of those pillars: economic development, social development, cultural development. And the reason that I put the Aga Khan Foundation, that's where it is in red, is that we're not the Aga Khan Foundation. It's not terribly important. I mean, who cares what we are? What counts is what we do. But that's just a little nuance. And you can see that in that social development package, there are 2 universities. There's the Aga Khan Foundation itself. There's a network of schools. There are health services. There's the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat. And there's the Aga Khan Academies. And one academy is going to be coming up in Oeiras. It'll probably be ready in about 5 years. So that's the network. And just to give you an idea of the different activities of the network in one region of the world, here are the countries in which one or more of these agencies actually operates. And I'm now going to go straight into why His Highness decided in the 70s to set up an award for architecture. And I'll draw your attention to that last sentence that I picked up from one of his recent interviews, where he says he wants to make the world a better place in terms of the injunctions of the Quran. And that means bringing values into environments, buildings, and contexts which make the quality of life better for future generations than it is today. So that seems to me such a wonderful mission statement that an architect would have, a planner could have. And here you have the founder of this network who's articulating this vision. This vision, which is related to those points that are on this slide, which indicate how important architecture is in terms of worldview, in terms of values, in terms of being the expression of a culture, in terms of dictating how people live together, how they live with each other, how they organize their places and spaces. And to be sure, this link is strong in every civilization, every culture, but it's probably particularly strong in Islam. And this is just another, what I do to, I've enlarged it without wanting to. So what do I do to, I use a Mac, and everything's different on Macs. Yeah, that's okay. Thanks, muito obrigado. So where was I? Yeah, this is the slide I was on. And I'm not going to say these things. I just want to give you a few moments. These are all taken from statements or interviews that His Highness has given. They explain why in the late 70s he brought a group of scholars, architects, and decision makers together to actually set up an award that began its work in 1980 with these three purposes: to recognize architectural excellence, to encourage not just architects, but clients and users to learn from their own architectural heritage, to close that gap, that discontinuity, the rupture of continuity between the past and the present, which is particularly strong across the Western world. And then thirdly, to try and set standards of building, standards of excellence in building that were appropriate to the needs and aspirations of those societies. And just in one sentence, if you could, what is the one single mission of the award? And that is to work, maybe you could call this a pedagogy of influence, a pedagogy of example, to influence the dynamic of contemporary architecture for the better. And that has given the award a very distinctive mandate. It is the only architecture in the world, award in the world that recognizes not just architects, but also clients, engineers, master artisans. So the award has gone to these sorts of people, not just to star architects. The second line is just some of the facts. 28 projects have been awarded so far, with almost 5,000 nominations received for those projects. And there's this huge documentation of actually more than 9,000 building projects. And this is the sort of basic resource. This archive is a very rich resource for educational purposes. And this is a slide, I should have shown it a little earlier. It changed places mysteriously. This is the Aga Khan himself. You see him here in the middle with a group of architects, some of whom are very well known, doing the planning for setting up the award. Nobody really knew what it was going to be. It's not as if you have this CEO, this spiritual leader who says, I know exactly what I want to do. He didn't know exactly what he wanted to do. So that's why he called on people that he thought were the best people to ask and who could help him. And what I'm sharing with you here now is just to give you an idea of the mechanism. And this is the mechanism that was put in place for the 2022 award cycle, which was given in Muscat several months ago in October of last year. And so you have a process where a network of nominators nominate properties, documentation is collected, and then the master jury has a first meeting in the year in which the award is going to be given. And as a result of that first meeting, a certain number of on-site reviews are requested by architects who go out, engineers and others, who go out to actually inspect the nominated sites on-site. A shortlist is announced. Then there's a second jury meeting to determine from that shortlist how many awards should be given. The announcement takes place in September, and the award ceremony is invariably in October and is followed by a series of post-award events. And so here, on this slide, you can't see the names, obviously, but here are faces of people who have served on either the steering committee, which gives general guidelines, or the master jury, which does the real nitty-gritty work. And it's always, in both cases, it's always a mix of architects, architectural historians, philosophers, writers, artists who serve on these two committees. So, if I start with the first cycle, what I'm going to share with you is just a couple of slides, a couple of views of each of the buildings from the first cycle. This is just a sort of a tapestry of what went into the first cycle. This is the first steering committee with His Highness that began to deliberate, and these are small photographs of some of the properties. And so what I'm sharing with you here is one of the properties in the first series, which was a case of how a historic building could be conserved and adapted for present-day reuse. And that was very sort of typically architectural. You could say that there were skills that you could recognize that they were involved in it. But then there was also this project, which was a kampung, almost a slum clearance project in Indonesia, which was the rehabilitation of a kampung, which is the Javanese word for that kind of settlement area. And there was nothing fancy. There was no great fancy architecture involved. And that binary, there will always be the art of architecture, the skills of the architect or the engineer, but also much more simple kinds of interventions in the built environment, which always have to be very community-based and linked to the improvement of the quality of life. You saw that phrase in the citation that I shared with you earlier. So here you have the Jakarta Kampung Improvement Program. That was what it was called. And it was the objective was to upgrade low-income areas and the associated challenge of providing housing for low-income residents. And this has been an abiding concern of the award over the cycles. So I go into the second cycle, and in the second cycle, the emphasis remained on this link with tradition. How do we restore that link with the heritage? But there was increasingly more and more of a concern on what we saw with the Kampung project, the Indonesian project, a concern with the problems of housing and habitat for populations, mainly urban, but also rural. And the slide that I'm going to share with you here, this is the Ramses Wisawasif Art Center in Giza, Egypt, which was built entirely by, does anybody know? Well, it was the architect himself, Ramses Wisawasif, and it was built in the 1950s entirely in mud brick, and it was used as a weaving school. Then it evolved, there were showrooms, workshops, and what for the architect was important was this revisiting of something that was quintessentially Egyptian, that you could associate with the pharaonic, with the Coptic, and even with the Muslim inheritance, something that would work for today. And in contrast completely, and this was not heritage, this is a modern building, this is a mosque. This is the White Mosque in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Visoko, which was really, the architect was saying, to hell with all of your traditions of mosque building. I want to do something that's completely different. I will respect the Qibla and the Mihrab. I will have a minaret, but this is my vision. And it was that daring on the part of that architect that appealed to the master jury when it decided on its awards. In the third cycle, there were 11 projects that were chosen. Some had to do with urban upgrading, but I'm going to show you a particular building. Some of you may recognize it, and you recognize it even better when I tell you who is the champion of this building on the master jury. Does anybody know where this building is? Well, it's a mosque in Pakistan. It's called the Bhong Mosque. And for many people, this would be an example of terrible kitsch architecture. And the champion of it was somebody called Robert Venturi. You've all heard about Robert Venturi, and perhaps from what you know of Robert Venturi, you're not surprised. And I'm just trying to see if I can get lower down on my notes page, because there's a little bit of an anecdote here. Can I go down, or is it not going to allow me to go down? Actually, I may not be able to go down, and knowing that could be the case, I brought some written notes. No, I don't think so, Jean. Okay, so one of the things that can anybody define for me how you would describe the work of Robert Venturi?
Postmodernism.
let's have a try, Jean. Maybe this is, he's too old for students of our time. He was a mannerist. He was known as a post-modern mannerist because he was interested in doing all kinds of extraordinary flamboyant things with buildings. You see his buildings. And that's why he liked this building, because it reminded him of what he himself liked to do. And he's very well known for having coined a maxim, less is a bore. And so what is he arguing against? Mies van der Rohe. Less is more. So he was a kind of bad boy of the architectural profession. And let me just read to you the citation of the jury, probably half written by Venturi himself. Hong enshrines and epitomizes the popular taste in Pakistan with all its vigor, pride, tension, and sentiment. Its use and misuse of signs and symbols expresses the appropriate growing pains of an architecture in transition. And that notion of transition certainly was very strong in the countries of what used to be called in those days still the third world. That transition, which involved transformation, which involved many borrowings, some of them quite indiscriminate borrowings from what they thought was the right thing to do in the West. So I'll continue on to the third cycle. And here in the third cycle, you had this housing complex in Morocco, whose name I've forgotten. I think was the Dar el Aman housing complex, and I have it here on my notes. But it doesn't matter, or maybe I have skipped a couple of pages. Let me just check. No, I'm not. And we go to the fourth cycle. Now there's a contrast. You have does anybody recognize the building on the left? Yes, the Institut du Monde Arabe, which is right near where I actually live in Paris. And the issue that came out very strongly in this cycle of the award, which had 12 laureates, was a combination of factors that the jury was concerned with. This rooting something in the contemporary, but having recourse to symbols and signs which come out of Islamic geometric patterns. And it was interesting because this was the first sort of very visible acknowledgement of the fact that there are representatives of Muslim cultures not living in their traditional homelands anymore because of the scale of movement, mobility, and migrations in the 20th century. You now have Muslims and Muslim architecture, you could call it, in many other parts of the world. And yet at the same time, the jury was concerned with maintaining a strong recognition of what was going to work for local communities and the poor and the rural. And the vision, the image on the right there is one of the places occupied by the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, the buildings that were set up by the Grameen Bank program, and for which Muhammad Yunus, the founder of the Grameen Bank program, won the Nobel Prize. So continuing now in the fourth cycle, this was a project in the diplomatic quarters of Riyadh. It's known as the Al-Kindi Plaza, and you can see the way in which there is now the beginnings of concern with elements other than the purely architectonic. It's the natural, the components of the environment which may not be built, and the whole issue of landscaping. How important is landscaping in relation to the structures that we build? And during that cycle, there was another building which has become iconic. Anybody? Not other than faculty. Does any student recognize this building? Which country, which architect? It's Bangladesh, and it's Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn's building, a magnificent building for the assembly, the parliament in Bangladesh. And so there again, you have in each cycle, there is this combination of different perspectives that come together under a single umbrella. And we are often asked, but what are the criteria? There must be criteria that the Aga Khan has established. No, not at all. The Aga Khan has absolutely no criteria that he's established other than the guidance that he gives to the steering committee whenever the steering committee meets for the first time. And that guidance is about working with the local community, with bridging the gap between tradition and modernity. It's about creating a modernity, a contemporary that is harmonious with its surroundings, and generally speaking, improving the quality of life, and thinking in terms of what really makes a difference for development. And those are very general ideas. And those general ideas are then shared by the steering committee, which gives a sort of general brief to the jury. And then the jury depends on, who are the strong characters in the jury. You have a Venturi in the jury, and you come up with those kinds of selections. But it's always a debate, and it's sometimes a difficult debate, a long debate, sometimes even a little acrimonious. I have never attended because of the nature of the process. It is considered to be confidential. But when the master jury presents its conclusions, His Highness has he doesn't object. And I'm sure there must be buildings that he doesn't like as much. Or when he's looked at the shortlisted projects, he must have said, I hope they choose this one. But probably they don't choose the ones he would like, but he accepts their decision completely. So I go on to the fifth cycle, and I'm sharing with you something that's interesting. This is a palace in Turkey, and this was recognized because the jury said it's very important for us, particularly if we have been colonized, or if we believe that our society today must turn its back on a bad tradition of the past. These are Ottoman palaces. But the Ottoman palaces, just like the colonial architecture in India, in Pakistan, in Africa, is part of the heritage of the people in India, Pakistan, Africa. And there are people who would like to pull these things down. So here the jury was saying, look, let's recognize really sensitive restoration and reuse of buildings that may reflect westernizing influences. But then what's wrong with westernizing influences? Those are the influences that we lived with. The sixth cycle went into a more sort of let's say, environmentalist process. And so what you have here is a high-tech tower, which has many, it's in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, and it has many energy-saving features. And in that same process, in that same year, this green area here is a reforestation project next to the city of Ankara, which served to actually constitute a kind of a buffer zone, protecting the city, limiting air pollution levels. And so here you have a kind of reasoning which says, look, there are urbanists who've thought about these things, which are environmental improvements, or others who've thought about a very bold kind of modernism that uses technology. That's the case on the left. Let's recognize those different things. And in that particular sixth cycle, there was this project that has become iconic, which is the project of the Pritzker Prize-winning Indian architect Balkrishna Doshi. It was a housing project which was built in a modular way so that the owners could actually move into it and do different things with their property as their incomes decreased, as their lives evolved. And what I wanted to show you here, this is a book that I've already gifted to the library. This is the result of a 4th-year design studio which was organized by a college in Mumbai, where the students went to the city of Indore, where this project is located, and looked at this project as well as another project, which was recognized by the award a few years earlier, which was a housing project as well. It was a slum clearance project. And the students were asked to work on these solutions that had been found by the architects, think of other solutions that they thought would work better, interview local people, find out what had happened. Here is the architect's project. Here is what the master jury said why it liked this project. Has it remained the same? And of course, there are a huge number of differences, and these differences were all documented by the students and the faculty, and then they made this into a book, which we encouraged because we thought it was such a good example of how the material could be used in a creative way. It's not just a question of saying, here's what the archon does, learn it. It's, this is what has been done, now what would you do better? Or how do you find that in reality things have worked out? And we have several projects like that. And actually out of this project and several others, we now have, with the Aga Khan Award for Architecture Secretariat, we have a new sub-project which consists of trying to assess the impact of the award, the impact that the award has had on the area itself, in relation to the building, in relation to architectural evolution in that country. And so that's a new project that's just getting off the ground. I'll move on. The seventh cycle was, I won't spend much time with it, it was the least diverse because 4 of the 7 projects were located in the Indian subcontinent. There were no particular new messages in this cycle. It was, what they were trying to do here was, let's look at projects that have some kind of a regional relevance in their own region. So the projects in South Asia, how are they relevant for the rest of the Asian continent? And here, what I've chosen is the 2 buildings, one by Charles Correa, the Indian Goan architect, and another one from the same cycle, which is a conservation project, the conservation of the old town of Hebron in the occupied territories. And it's, in both cases, the emphasis was on the appropriateness. And for the Korea project, this assembly building, the same thing, the assembly for a local government, a provincial government in India, the jury said, this complex represents the creation of an ensemble that provides a wide range of spatial experiences as one moves through the complex. So of course we can't do, but you can see that there's use of red sandstone tiles. We can't see the tiles, but it was very ingeniously put together. Now this is a project from the 8th cycle, which again had traditional design elements, a restoration project. And this is the Nubian Museum in Aswan that maybe some of you have actually visited. And again, here you have a contemporary architect trying to be contemporary in his use of form, yet be inspired by ancient temple structures, fortresses, as well as the domestic architecture vocabulary. And it was considered to be, by the master jury, a really pretty good example of that aim being fulfilled. And this is coming back to the landscaping dimension. This is a public garden called the Bagh-e-Ferdowsi in Tehran, which was innovative because of its approach to both the conception and the execution of environmental design. Again, here, how to create a space, a connecting space between urbanism and nature at the base of the mountains, which are behind the city of Tehran. It became very important for young people as a place of social interaction, a space of recreation, and a very original use of the topography of the site. Now, the 9th cycle, 2 very iconic structures, one of which is shown here. You know who's the building, who built that one? Yeah, Cesare Petronas Office Towers. And even more iconic was the Biblioteca Alexandrina in Cairo, built by a Norwegian team. Then you have the Petronas Towers, but in the same cycle, you have that, which is a school, which is a village school in Burkina Faso, the first project of somebody called Francis Kéré. Anybody heard of Francis Kéré? Why? He got the Pritzker this year or last year? Last year. Okay. This was his first project, and it really bowled over the master jury because really on the opposite side of the spectrum, because of the way traditional materials and techniques were being used to create a modernist structure. I'll continue to the 10th cycle, which again continued the experimental trend. And one thing that happened that was significant for the life of the award, previously, up to this point, the jury had not announced publicly the shortlisted projects. In this cycle, it decided in 2007 to publish the shortlisted projects. And curiously, it gave it a little bit more room to decide and to award the award to fewer projects, because there'd been this wide selection of shortlisted projects. It gave them a little bit of leeway. And the aim here was very particularly to try and, in the projects that were chosen, explore this complex negotiation that a building or a home, a dwelling has with being there and being somewhere else, with the challenges of mobility and migration. And this is a view from Nicosia. Nicosia, which was a divided city. And the prize that year, the award that year, was given to a project in which both the Turkish side, the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots, created a commission together to improve the condition of Nicosia city. And so that division was, if you like, overcome by this joint effort that was undertaken by architects and planners. But quite different. This is an embassy building. It's built by a Dutch architect called Dirk van Gameren, and it's in Addis Ababa. It's the Dutch embassy in Addis Ababa. Again, modernist, but making very subtle use of the site, of materials, locally available materials, timber, craftsmanship, and the like. The 11th cycle, you have this project, which is a wetlands project in Saudi Arabia, which is all about the restoration of the environmental restoration, natural areas. And then you have a very ingenious project in a Chinese village. Here, nothing to do with Muslims, no Muslims in this village, but it had been nominated because the two parts of the village were kind of separated, and there was a creek, a small creek that separated the two parts. And the architect decided that he would make a structure that would be a school, and he called it the Bridge School, and it enabled the two sides of the village to come together. Again, totally modernist in conception, but local in the use of the materials that were employed. The 12th cycle, this is, you will recognize that bridge, yes, in Rabat Saleh. And this view on the right here is the Muslim cemetery in a town in Western Austria called Altach, which had a Muslim population for many years, but the people, when they died, families could not actually bury their dear ones, their loved ones, according to Muslim rites. So either they didn't have the Muslim rites, or they sent the bodies back home. And so this, apart from that sort of sentimental reasoning, which the appropriateness for that community, it was also a recognition of the quality of the design, the profile, the fluid geometry, the iconic nature of the building. And in the 13th cycle, 2016, you have one building that was probably given out of sentimental reasons. Does anybody recognize the work here? What is that characteristic of? Whose work is that? Zaha Hadid. And she had died just a few months before. It had been nominated. It's in Beirut. It's part of the American University of Beirut. And you had also, the next slide shows another project which is very interesting, and I'll explain to you why. That's a larger vision of the Zaha Hadid project, and that is a public space called Superkillen in Denmark, which is inhabited. It's in a very poor zone, sort of poorest zone of the city, and so it obviously has all the immigrants. So you have Muslim immigrants, you have Hindu immigrants, you have African immigrants from different African countries, you have European immigrants from Eastern Europe, and the architects decided that they wanted to make a space that had symbolic elements that spoke to all these cultures and that could be owned by all of these cultures. And that's what worked very well in this case. It was designed as really a meeting place for the residents of Denmark's most ethnically diverse neighborhoods. So maybe in Lisbon, you could imagine something like this in maybe Moraria. That would transform. And this brings us to the 2019 cycle. And this is where I want to share with you a film, which, how do I get to the, I should be able to click on the film, because here the master jury, the steering committee, and the architects themselves are given the floor. So yeah, that would work. So you need the sound, that's the only thing. You probably need to go back to the beginning.
Behind the Aga Khan award. It's not only a...
Yep.
One word that I can think of is impact, social responsibility. Commitment is probably the best way to describe what is behind the Aga Khan award. It's not only about giving an award.
Well, what we can do is we can go on to the one that's on the computer.
Going on. Talking about influencing the...
Did it work actually?
Yes.
We can go out of the presentation, and it's on the
link.
The practice itself, I'm trying to shift it towards a better future. One word that I can think of is impact, social responsibility. Commitment is probably the best way to describe what is behind the Aga Khan award. It's not only about giving an award to a project, but influencing the practice itself. I'm trying to shift it towards a better future.
I think it's the only award presently in architecture that is rooted in social values, and not only in an architectural image or structure or particular architectural artifact.
We're looking into design excellence, innovation and solutions. So I think the group of projects that have been selected in this cycle try to tackle these matters in a very diverse manner.
I also think that the manner by which the projects are assessed gives validity and credibility to the award.
The review is a moment where there's also needs to be some form of human interaction with the users both in terms of the conception of the building, but also in terms of the fruition of the building.
we had a wide variety of expertises, and that really allowed us to look at projects from multiple ways, but also to enlarge our understanding of how we look at different regions, places in the world, and how we understand the way in which architecture was contributing to these places.
What came out of the fact was very coherent. The thing that the jury selected was, first of all, it was very much aligned to what the steering committee ourselves and asked for them to look into. We tried to stimulate them to really take a broad view on kind of a long term.
It's basically looking into architecture, which has expanded and gone beyond its role, and I think that's worthy of mentioning, because every project that you see, the architect just did not acknowledge or worked on the problems and the challenges of the project itself, but they have gone beyond that.
The project in Bahrain, I think it's one of the very good projects that addresses issues of cultural identity in a very effective manner.
One of the main motivations and inspirations in this project is to make sure that this is a thriving city once again.
They found a very simple way using traditional methods, but reinventing them in a way that was really remarkable.
I said that no, I'm not going to innovate everything here. So my innovation is that how to have a platform that floats and that settles on the ground.
The museum is a project that actually describes the people of Palestine. They are rooted, they are grounded, and they are one with nature.
If you're building a museum, it should be something that's sustainable. It's not just a huge gesture that afterwards you wonder how you're going to operate.
The wetlands project is fascinating because of its non-architecture or its negative architecture, in the sense that it is the merit of the project is to blend into a natural environment to make it accessible to a large audience.
We want to make something beautiful, sensible, and try as much as possible to integrate the site by really merging these projects on the site, making a beautiful kind of sensible, let's say, strategies by bringing nature all the way to the grass here.
This is a fantastic example of what might be possible using simple principles that are related to energy and sustainability and low impact in relation to the environment.
Grâce à ce système de double toiture et double façade, on arrive à réduire la température extérieure de 40 à 25 degrés à l'intérieur.
I think what we really regarded was this this commitment that combined political will and funding from the state, the engagement of local politicians, the engagement of local architects, engagement of the community.
We are not working to help the architect implement his vision. We are working to make the people happy.
So in a way, you're not making architecture, but you're sending a message through a kind of curated collection of projects. And that curated collection of projects really stands as a kind of grouping that really captures a sort of moment in time.
I'm going to need your help now to get out of here. Yeah, I'm in the. No, that's YouTube. Yeah. Okay. Right. So I probably after such an interesting film, what I'm going to say is a bit of an anti-climax, but I'm going to say it in as few words as possible because I wanted to complete the story, and the story ends with the 2022 cycle. And this little map shows you where the winning and shortlisted projects were actually located. And I'm going to go very quickly. You can't really see very much, so I'm going to go right into the individual projects. And some people, there were 6 projects that were awarded, and some people were very disappointed by this continuing emphasis on very simple, if not simplistic, local structures. And they said, but what's the architecture involved in, for example, this urban river spaces project, which becomes something for the community to use. It improves its access to the river. But it was done so simply and with such an economy of means and such elegant success that's what convinced the master jury. Another example, and of course there's something obviously a little bit political here, is the community spaces that were built for the Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And nobody has actually quite understood why it is that the architects in Bangladesh are so successful at getting Aga Khan Award projects, because they have quite a large number of them. And there's even an institute in Dhaka that runs a whole course, and they invite people from abroad to come, a whole course on the projects that have been awarded in Bangladesh. I think it's the closeness to the natural conditions and real human needs that explains that. So that's the same. This is an international airport in a small city of Indonesia, and you can see why the building itself sort of extends the language of the landscape into the building, and it's a completely different way of being in an airport if you walk through it. This was, the prize was actually awarded in Muscat not just to the architects, but to the city governor, who had wanted this project, and he had chosen this project, and so he came for the award ceremony as well. And we think that this is going to have quite a big influence in Indonesia, because they're planning to build some 300 more airports in small cities like this over the coming years. And this is a project in Tehran, which is an abandoned brewery, which became an art center, and it's now a private museum for contemporary art. And so here again, you have a return to that abiding theme of appropriate reuse of a historical building through innovative architecture. This is back to Senegal, a school, again, built very simply, but with references to the surrounding environment. And the last example here is the Nimea guest house. So we're back to a great architect, which has been abandoned for many years in Tripoli, in Lebanon, which again doesn't have anything specifically Islamic about it, but which is worthy of rewarding that discovery and the restoration of that building. And with that, I've finished. Thank you very much for being such a good audience, and I hope you. I should have said that you feel free to interrupt during the presentation, but I know that you're so polite in Portugal that you wouldn't have dared to do that. But I hope you will now.
Thank you, Raj. Obrigado. Se tiverem questões para colocar, alguns de vocês serão obrigados a fazê-lo. Façam neste momento.
Podem falar em português, and if I don't understand, I'll ask Ron to help. But I understand sort of a lot.
São livros para ele, se quiser.
Yes. Ok, yes. Quanto tempo demora mais ou menos a reunião do Master Jury?
Usually it's 1.5 or 2 days. The longer meeting is the second one, when they have to determine the shortlist, and that's where all the fights occur, because there's a lot of disagreement, and you can imagine that particular jury members come with their preferred projects. And so the second meeting is usually longer, but it has to be just 2 days.
Yes.
And it can be two very long days, 12-hour days, 14-hour days.
A edição de 2015 foi em Lisboa, em Portugal, a apresentação.
Sim, a apresentação, a cerimônia, em Lisboa em 2013. Right.
So the idea of the architects present their projects, they submit the projects to the Aga Prize.
No, it's nominators.
It's nominated.
Right.
So there's a second, first degree of nominations that are made.
Yes.
And those are local nominations.
They don't have to be local, but they generally are people who know the country. For example, if it's a country like Egypt, there's no problem. There are local architects or faculty members of one of the universities. If in certain cases the nominator is somebody who has been several times to that particular country and knows it, and sometimes the nominator is somebody drawn from the cadre, the roster, as it were, of nominators, who goes into the setting fairly cold without any particular previous knowledge. It's quite varied, but I think I should specify that the nominators are not the people who visit, it's the on-site reviewers. I was getting mixed up between the two. So the nominators are just people who have a bright idea. If I could even be a nominator, perhaps. I've seen a wonderful building in Portugal. So the nomination is filed according to certain parameters that have to be followed, certain kind of documentation, photographs, and so on and so forth. And then there's a screening process that is carried out by the Secretariat. And all the projects that are considered eligible are then seen by the master jury. The master jury then says, okay, from these eligible projects, we discard half of them, or 3/4 of them. The ones we really like, these need to be looked at much more closely. And that's where the on-site reviewers get sent. Yeah.
but you also spoke that there's an overview of the impact of the award in the people, but I was wondering if there is also a kind of an overview on the nominations and applications that are made, in the sense of how well do they represent. Well, there is this idea of a common representation, I suppose. So how are they leveled in terms of all the countries, or are they more are there unsettled?
I understand your question. It's an important question. It's left pretty random, in the sense that the nominators are people who are considered to have their fingers on the pulse. Many of them are journalists, architectural critics, and so the award itself, they also travel. The staff of the award is a very small staff, but projects are brought to their attention as well. But there is no foolproof way in advance of determining some kind of a grid. It happens the other way around, if you like.
So, if I understood, there is no criteria in each cycle. It depends on the nominations.
It depends on the master jury.
Yes.
First of all, the steering committee sets out certain priorities. Like in the more recent cycles, it is set out the great importance of looking at the interface between traditional materials, the environment, and the local population. The first master jury would not even have thought of that.
Of course.
They would have said, we want you to look at how tradition and modernity can be combined in a great building. So really, the architect was totally central. Now what has happened is that the user, the community, is more central. And that evolution is more or less given in a general way by the steering committee. And then it's interpreted by the master jury. And sometimes it's interpreted quite strictly, at other times not so strictly. But the master jury is master.
Do you think these prizes contribute to the development of architecture in these countries, namely in Bangladesh, for example?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I'm not an architect, so I do not know there were so many prizes in Bangladesh.
Yes. It is definitely done that, but I don't know of any scientific study, let's say any research done by an anthropologist, let's say, which actually did try and measure this. It's a little bit like cultural diplomacy. Everybody says it's wonderful that each country should have a cultural diplomacy. Nobody's ever measured what impact the cultural diplomacy actually has. So here, that's a very good question. And the impressionistic takeaway, the answer to your question is that in countries where there's, like Bangladesh, it's been very influential. In Egypt, the work of the award has been very influential. Perhaps not so much in Saudi Arabia, but because there are other forces that are in play there. But I think the answer is definitely yes. Well, I recognize a lady here, and then the lady there. Please.
Ao longo destes 40 anos de prémio e a designação de arquitetura, inicialmente foram mais centrados na arquitetura, mas mostrou-nos projetos que vão também para os espaços naturais, para que enquadram não o objeto, mas áreas de cidades. O que eu pergunto é se, havendo algum impacto, e eu acho que tem que haver algum impacto, se esta designação do prémio, ao longo destes anos, não merece aqui uma revisão e uma maior abertura, porque já não estamos a falar exclusivamente da arquitetura. E se pensar alguma vez em renomear o prémio, uma vez que nos mostrou aqui esta maior abertura, e isso é significativo.
Sim. That's an important point, but I think what's the word I'm looking for? The sort of the prégnance, you would say in French, of the term Arcadia Award for Architecture. It's so established, and people have realized that it's not just about architects, because the actual practice has proved that. I haven't heard of any recent discussion along those lines of the steering committee saying we should call it something else. It's too well known for what it is to change. If I were in a position of responsibility, I would understand where you're coming from, but I wouldn't want to change the name for that reason. Because, and it is criticized for that reason. I was in India recently, and I met several architects on my trip. And one of them was very violently against the last series. He said, what's minor projects, not really architecture. And so we said, fine, but don't you think those projects are important for the people who live in them and use them? And he wasn't too happy with it. He wanted something more spectacular. Madam.
Thank you for your presentation. I clearly remember the green presentation in Castelo de São Jorge in 2013, beautiful event, and the exhibition in the Cultural Center of Belém, where you could see and the difference, the shift from the architecture to the user of the architecture, and that was, I think, very clear on the selected projects that were presented there, and the videos and the comments made on the project, where Aga had the kindness to invite Portuguese architects to comment, which was very nice. But the thing I wanted to ask is this shift from the building to the user. I know it's difficult to measure, but is there any interest by the Aga Khan institution to understand the impact of the awards on the people?
We are beginning, that's a really good question. We are beginning, I referred to that a little earlier. What happened is that we've constituted a little Middle Eastern group of architectural faculty, and the Egyptian member of this informal task force, if you like, said, look, I want my students, fourth year design studio students, I want them to look at all of the premiated projects in Egypt, and the seminar will be devoted, the fourth year seminar will be devoted to those projects. And I want my students to re-examine those projects and look at the impact, the broader impact. And that's what they did. And they came up with some surprising conclusions. There's one project that's been totally abandoned. It was thought very highly of when it was created, but the family just can't maintain it, and it's in ruins. And there are other projects in that series which, on the other hand, have had quite a lot of impact on architectural practice and on the local community. So that is something that we are now saying we will now try and find partners in architecture schools who are willing to do the same thing with their students for the projects in their countries.
But does the people realize the importance of the award? Because if it doesn't have an impact on their daily life, does it at least enhance the esteem for the architecture, to care for the building? Does it have that effect?
I think it does. When you see when the award is presented in any country, there's a lot of media coverage, and that media coverage, including the speeches that are made, the authorities of the countries concerned, all of that is picked up, and so there is a kind of spinning down or feeding down, a trickle down effect into public perception. We're sure that occurs, but we are not. Again, this hasn't been studied scientifically.
Thank you.
Question.
Sorry, I'm a little deaf. So, and I didn't bring my hearing aids today. Forgot them. So maybe João, you can relay the questions.
Is there a maximum number of projects to be selected?
No. I think the maximum ever given an award was something like 19 in one cycle. But the tendency has been, maybe it's because of inflation, the tendency has been to reduce. And since the prize money is more or less a fixed amount, when you have 6, 7 projects, it's easier to distribute the prize money in a significant way. So the numbers are tending to be around between 6 and 10. That's more or less the norm now.
Very good question. When you presented the Nicosia case,
yes,
so to say, it is a committee, or it is not a project or architect. It's the committee of the people that live there in the border of the city. In this,
No, it's an urbanistic project to conserve the city center and in the not the no man's land, but on either side. Yeah, and it's a committee of architects and urbanists. Yeah, from the Turkish side and the Greek side.
Tenho uma pergunta. O arquiteto Hassan Fatih foi de certeza premiado.
Sim.
Por uma obra, por um conjunto de obras. Como é que funciona?
Hassan, there's something called the Chairman's Award, which I didn't refer to at all, that is given regularly, not always. It's to the work of an architect that has been particularly significant. So it was given to Hassan Fatih. It was given to Oleg Grabar, who is a historian, an architectural historian at Harvard. And I had the pleasure of working with him many years ago. And he was an enormous influence, creating the award, informing the work of the award. So he was given this recognition, the Chairman's Award. Who else? There was Jeffrey Bawa, the Sri Lankan architect, also received a Chairman's Award. And Rifat Shadirji, who is a very well-known Iraqi architect, got the Chairman's Award. Yeah. It's an award for the opus, the life work of that architect. So,
earlier you mentioned that the foundation ships in archives, I figured about all the work you have examined. Is that publicly available? Can we look at it online? Do you have like a repository where we can access?
Yes, the repository is at MIT. It's called ArcNet, ArchNet, ArchNet.org. And it was created by the trust many years ago with MIT. It now belongs to MIT. It's run by MIT, the MIT libraries, and we give it still a small subvention every year, and everything is available. All the nominated projects, the shortlisted projects, those are available on ArcNet. And if you need, if anybody, a researcher, needs high-resolution images, there is a facility in Geneva at the trust where high-resolution images can be provided, because the images on ArcNet are not high-resolution.
I don't know if you mentioned, but I was curious because there's I'm not from architecture.
Well, I'm not either.
No, but once the architecture is turned into the perspective of the user, I was wondering, because I thought you mentioned that I can't recall. You mentioned there are other specialists regarding analyzing the proposals, and I would say, besides architects,
right,
urbanists, there's anthropologists,
yes,
sociologists, other kinds of specialists too. For instance, it's stick in my mind the idea of a negative architecture in the space of the field. So I was wondering if there's a congregation of specialists or if just coming from architecture.
There's a mix that's put together. There have to be some really good architects, and then together with the architects, a philosopher or writer, for example, Kwame Anthony Appiah. Anthony Appiah was a very well-known political philosopher in the United States. He's written an enormous amount of work on cosmopolitanism and other subjects. He was on a jury, a master jury. Suada Miri, who is a Palestinian writer who actually trained in architecture. She has a degree, but she's not an architect. Bashir Soleiman Diagne, who is a philosopher at Columbia University. He's from, I think, from Congo, I'm not sure, but he now lives in America. He's on the current, on the last steering committee or master jury, I forget which one. So there's always one or two people who are not from the architectural profession, but are sensitive to built form and have thought about it. Maybe they haven't thought about it at all. Maybe Appiah hadn't written anything about architecture, but his ideas on pluralism, on living together, were picked up by His Highness or by other people who said, this is an interesting person, we should get him on the jury.
Se calhar só por curiosidade, o arquiteto Sinan de Turquia ganhou, vai ganhar algum dia, não sei, não.
Would Sinan get an award?
Sim.
Oh, I'm sure.
Sim.
Yeah. Sure. You mean a building by Sinan? No, no, because it is an award
do século XX.
for contemporary architecture, but it can't be architecture that's just been finished this year. It has to have been finished, I forget exactly, maybe 2 years ago. And it can be older. For example, the Niemeyer example, the building itself is old from the early 50s. The restoration is recent. But there's no question of awarding the Arkan Award to Sinan. No, that wouldn't.
Because Alhambra was there also. A photo.
Restoration.
No, a restoration.
No, I don't think the Alhambra was ever.
Yeah, it was Alhambra, but maybe it's the system, the water system that
It could be that, or maybe somebody made a mistake because I'm not.
No, it was in a kind of a puzzle.
One of those mosaics. Could it have been about, because there's Medinat al Zahra, which is a museum in Spain, in Cordoba, but I'm not aware of any prize for the Alhambra, but you have internet here? Yes. I can look it up. If you just type in Alhambra Arkan Award for Architecture, if there's anything, it'll come up. And I'm not familiar with absolutely everything yet. KH, not KA. Okay. You probably will recognize anyway. The ceremony was held in Granada. That's why. Yeah. I'd forgotten that. The ceremony was held in Granada. So that's why you could have the Castello San Jorge.
Okay. Let's call it a day. Thanks again, Raj.
Thank you.